Hi there. In this video I'm going to address some of the issues surrounding composition and style, and as part of that I'm going to take some lessons from the developments that have recently been announced in artificial intelligence. But I'm going to start by giving the reasons for why I'm looking at this, and these stem from a number of presentations by YouTube vloggers in the landscape photography area, giving tips on how to address composition. Now, I'm not going to name the people concerned. This is not a finger pointing exercise, but all of them have got at least 50,000 subscribers, and they're presenting their views in a training context, and all of them are also offering workshops. So I think it's very important in this sort of area that where there are possible concerns that information may not be strictly accurate or may be misleading, that they're actually challenged. And in my working life, I worked as a university lecturer and gave lecturing materials to undergraduates and carried out research. But one of the historic roles of a university academic, certainly in the UK, was to challenge received wisdom. So basically, if you were presented with information, you'd look at it and assess its reliability. Were the assumptions made valid? Were the predictions that came out of it robust and useful? To give some illustration of the concerns that I have, I've just put this information up on the screen. And what we've got here is a number of titles of videos from well-known vloggers. I've highlighted the keywords in red because I think they are trigger words for potential viewers. 5 secrets you must know to improve as a landscape photographer. Now, suggestion is if you don't know these secrets, you're not going to improve. If you do know these secrets, you will. Can we really reduce success or effectiveness as a photographer down to 5 secrets? A 5-step formula to master landscape photography. 5-step formula. You can just plug these parameters into equations, put in a couple of variables, and out drops a perfect picture. I don't really think this is a realistic concept. And then to tag it with the word master. There is a concept that to master a craft takes 10,000 hours of practice and training. Now, I'll come back to that later because there's some interesting issues around that that arise from artificial intelligence research. But the suggestion that you can just plug these concepts into a formula and suddenly you're a master, I think is highly misleading and unfair to people who are trying to improve. 7 photography composition tips to get better photos now. Same sort of lines really. Sure, there are some tips, but they're mainly technical. Aesthetic tips, possibly, but better photos now. 7 simple composition tips you should know. Well, given the vast variety of scenes that you might want to take pictures of, the variation that you can have in times of day and weather conditions, can we really just condense this down to 7 tips? 7 foolproof, even stronger. Use these, you can't go wrong. You're bound to succeed. Better pictures. And finally, 7 simple photo composition tips to improve photography. And I think the issue with all of these is that they oversimplify what is really potentially a quite complex situation. And the suggestion is that you can quantify aspects of composition decisions in a way that I think is highly questionable. Now, when I was thinking about this, I looked at the success of these people and the number of views they've got, and I asked myself the question, who am I to question this? It's certainly not the way I approach my photography, and I'll come on to that. But are these guys wrong? Well, one of the masters of photography, landscape photography, generally acknowledged, is Ansel Adams. So let's look at a quote that Ansel Adams came out with. There are no rules for good photographs, there are only good photographs. I found that I felt a little bit more relaxed about the approach that I'm taking here and the questions that I'm raising. So, what approach can we take to produce photographic compositions that are appealing? And I'm going to suggest there are 3 issues here. The first is you have to know what you like. You start off with trying to produce pictures that you find aesthetically pleasing. The second thing is you've got to know what there is to like. If your experiences are really limited, then you only can pick what you like from what you know. And the advice that is widely given, that you should look at lots of other people's work, that you should look at lots of painters' work, you should go to lots of places, are all highly valid because they improve your awareness of what there is to know. So these things are iterative. As you increase what there is, your knowledge of what there is to know, so you will broaden what you know you like. And the third aspect is technical. Once you know what you like and what there is to like, then you need to know technically how to capture an image that fits in with what you like. So it's a fairly simple and straightforward process from that point of view. Where does AI come in? Why have I talked about AI? Well, the first thing to say is that AI is a very exciting label to give to something, and this video is perhaps quite timely because Luminar has just been brought out with AI-based sky replacement, and this has attracted a lot of attention. But it's not really intelligence. What we're talking about here is machine learning. When we get true artificial intelligence, we're into Terminator country. Skynet becomes self-aware. At the moment, fortunately, we're not at that stage. We are talking about systems that learn. And the way basically they work is that they are presented with lots of training information, lots of pictures of photographs with skies, with different sorts of foregrounds, and they are presented with ideal solutions, and they are trained to match one to the other. Now, this technology has come a long way, but 20 years ago it was pioneered with assessing the likelihood of somebody defaulting on a loan. So banks use savings histories and bank account details of thousands of customers and use that to match those savings parameters with whether or not the person would default on a loan. They train that with lots of data, and then they can predict whether somebody's a good bet for a loan or a bad bet for a loan, and it means they don't have to leave those decisions to expensive managers, so it's a cost-cutting exercise. But they've been around in technology for a fair while as well, in photography for a fair while. So if you look at evaluative metering, matrix metering, whatever your brand of camera uses to assess a complex exposure calculation for a complex image, then all of those will be based on that sort of machine learning. They will be presented with lots of information and trained against lots of outcomes, and they will try to build up a mathematical description of the relationship between the detectors on the sensor and what aesthetically a bunch of technicians think is a good or a bad picture. So we can use that sort of information. But that's what our brains do as well. And that's where we start to have an issue, or I certainly start to have an issue with this sort of composition advice that I've referred to earlier. Recently there was an article published looking at how far artificial intelligence stroke machine learning had come, and how it actually compared with the development of a human child. And what they found was that it takes roughly 1,000 times as much information to train a machine learning program as is required by a human child to learn and develop. Again, showing that we're a long way away from true intelligence. But this opens up some interesting possible explanations on things like aptitude. Coming back to this 10,000 hours of mastery, is it always going to be 10,000? Mozart wrote his first symphony, I think, at the age of 12. Other people write their first symphony at the age of 30. Some people obviously never write one. There is aptitude. If we think about that in terms of training and the 10,000 hours, then aptitude perhaps describes how quickly we are able to learn or make those associations required to establish mastery. So for some people it may be 1,000 hours, for some people 10,000 hours, for some people 50,000 hours, for others never. Generally speaking, I think we tend to be attracted, certainly with our use of spare time, to activities where we have natural aptitude. So I'm not wanting to put anybody off here. But the question comes out of this: are we learning to form a relationship, or are we learning to understand? And do we need to understand? You can teach a child, a young child, to memorize a poem. It doesn't necessarily mean they understand what that poem means or what the author of that poem, the emotions the author of that poem was trying to convey, but they can still learn it. So what I'm coming to with this is, with composition, do we actually need to understand the nature of the relationship, so long as we can train ourselves to recognize what we like and form the basis of our composition on what we like, without actually having a detailed analysis of why we like it? Sure, it helps if that will come, but maybe that comes later. And maybe if it never comes, we can still produce photographs, compositions, images that we find aesthetically pleasing. And just to support that proposition, I'll come to another Ansel Adams quote. "You don't make photographs just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you've read, the music you have heard, and the people you have loved." So it seems to me that Ansel Adams is very much taking this view that you assimilate all of this information and it all feeds in to your assessment of aesthetics, which in turn feeds in to your composition. So go out there, gain lots of experience, and feed that in to a knowledge of what you like, acquire the expertise required for you to capture and frame that image. And that leads me on to the final section of this video, and that is style. And style is something that there's lots of different views on, and lots of people take strong views. You must search for your style, you must find your style. Personally, I think that's wrong. My background is in science and engineering, and there is a concept in science of what are known as emergent phenomena. And what I would suggest is that style is an emergent phenomenon. I'll give you an example of an emergent phenomenon. If you look at something like birds flying in formation, bird flocks, and particularly the exquisite patterns of flight in a murmuration, you would think those are dictated by a highly complex set of rules, but in fact they're not. Very simple rules like, if I'm a bit further back, move forward; if I'm a bit further below, move up; a bit further below, move down; couple for left and right. simple set of maybe half a dozen to a dozen rules can explain all of those phenomena. So if you develop your own personal aesthetic, what you like, and you take lots of pictures that you like, what you will find is your style will emerge from your experiences and the images you create. So this to me suggests perhaps a different approach, a move away from rule-based systems. I'm going to finish off by talking about some of the so-called rules of composition: lead-in lines, rule of thirds, and golden section or golden ratio. Now, if you look at lots and lots of pictures, you will find that many of them will confer to one or all of these guidelines. And this really was what happened at the time of the Renaissance. And if you look up golden section, you'll get references to one of the greatest geniuses in human history, Leonardo da Vinci, and the significance of the golden section in his images. And the thing about the golden section is that the mathematical derivation from that comes up to a parameter that is commonly seen in nature and describes a number of spiral things from the heads of a fern to the shape of a shell. But although there is attempts to explain why such compositions were attractive were made, they still leave a lot to be desired. They are still largely empirical. You can't sit down with a set of first principles and write a mathematical description for what makes a good composition. And these things are all guidelines that have come out of experience, very much like evaluative and matrix metering. So before you get too hung up about, am I doing this right? Do I need these 7 compositional steps or these 5 essential steps to foolproof compositions? Practice. Go out, get lots of experience, produce your own images and review them. Decide what you like, not necessarily why you like it.